Hey, it's me, Marie, and today we're gonna talk about what it's like to be single for 24 years. I've been thinking about this topic and addressing it in some way, whether it be through a blog post or a video or something, for a really long time. And I have just had a really rough weekend dealing with loneliness and a lot of issues that kind of stem from this topic. So I finally decided, what the heck, I'm gonna make a video about it, because something that always really helps me is feeling like I'm not alone in some kind of struggle that I'm facing. It just reassures me to know that there's other people out there who feel the way that I feel, and I honestly think that I could hopefully encourage some people by just sharing my own story and my experience with this. So I want to share just 4 takeaways that I have learned from being single for a really long time, and also 4 practical tips that help me when I'm having a really rough time and I am really struggling with loneliness and the desire for a relationship. So, what is it like to be single for 24 years? A little bit of just my experience is I've never been in a relationship. I've never had anyone even ask me to be their girlfriend. There has been one person that I went on dates with for a while, and I was hopeful that it would lead to a relationship, but it did not. And that really is the extent of my experience there. And I am someone who has a deep desire in my heart for a relationship, and eventually one day for marriage and a family. And it can be very difficult to be single for a long time if those are things that you are craving. And I also just want to quickly say that I know I am not the person who has the most extreme experience here. I know that there are people out there who have been single for longer than 24 years, and I'm not at all trying to usurp that or say that, like, oh, I have it the worst. I know the most extreme example of this situation. But I do know what it's like to be single and to not really have those desires and those wants met for decades of your life. And I just want to share, because I understand that walk in the same way that someone who has been single for 5 years understands, in the same way that someone who has been single for 30 years understands. Without further ado, let's talk about what is it like to be single for 24 years, because that's me. I think the first thing that I want to say in terms of being single for a really long time is that it is not always fun, it is not always enjoyable, and that is okay. There's a lot of advice about being content in the season of life that you're in, and I do think that's true, but I also think that we are never called to be fake or dishonest about our feelings, and there are plenty of days, trust me, where there is just an ache and just a longing to be in a relationship, and you can't always just poof that away. And I think it would have meant a lot to me if I had heard this sooner in life, that it was okay to not be happy all of the time when you're single. So that's my first takeaway, and I just want to reassure that God does know our hearts and our desires. And it's really okay to be really honest with Him about what we're wanting and what we're desiring in our seasons. So Psalm 139 tells us, "O Lord, you have examined my heart, and you know everything about me. You know when I sit down or stand up. You know my thoughts, even when I'm far away. You see me when I travel and when I rest at home. You know everything I do. You know what I am going to say even before I say it, Lord. You go before me and you follow me. You place your hand of blessing on my head." It goes on to say, "You made all the delicate inner parts of my body and knit me together in my mother's womb. Thank you for making me so wonderfully complex. Your workmanship is marvelous. How well I know it. You watched me as I was being formed in utter seclusion, as I was woven together in the dark of the womb. You saw me before I was born. Every day of my life was recorded in your book. Every moment was laid out before a single day passed. Oh, how precious are your thoughts about me, O God. They cannot be numbered. I can't even count them. They outnumber the grains of sand, and when I wake up, you are still with me. I think one of the biggest reassurances of this verse is just how known we are by God, and that there are desires in our hearts that He placed in us. My desire for marriage, I know, is something that God put in me. It's a part of my being. Not everybody has it. There are some people who don't have a desire to be married, and they desire to be single, and that is of God in the same way. But He already knows what we're thinking. He already knows that we are having a hard time and that we're dissatisfied. And I feel like it is just shortchanging Him if we're not honest with Him about that. A lot of the time I have to pray that, God, I really don't want to be single right now. This really isn't what I want, but I trust you, and ultimately I really need you to help me right now. And I think praying some of those honest prayers are what help you be content. But it's okay if that desire for a relationship never completely goes away, because I don't think it will for me, because I think ultimately it is God's will for me to be in a relationship. It's just that I have to be reliant on His timing too. So that's my first thing. My first thing is that it's okay to not always be happy that you're single. And I think the best thing you can do is just be honest with God about how you're feeling, because He already knows how you're feeling. So why would you lie to Him? Why would you fake it if you're not overjoyed with your situation? All right, the second thing that I want to say about being single for a really long time is to just acknowledge that it can be painfully, devastatingly lonely sometimes. This comes back to praying those honest prayers, because I don't know what else you can do in this situation. I think it can be so hurtful to receive advice at times from people who aren't single, who don't understand the ache that is there. Because I just want to acknowledge, and I wish that someone had acknowledged to me sooner, that there is a pain that comes with longing for something that isn't present in your life. And I can even speak from my very limited experience of going on dates with this one person that I've gone on dates with. It was different. And that's not to say that that person was fulfilling me in a way that God cannot, but there is something special. God created love, and God created romance, and it pleases and delights Him. And there is something special about having a romance with somebody. And when it's not there, there is a certain kind of emptiness from not having that presence of romance in your life. 1 Peter 5:7 tells us, "Give all your worries and cares to God, for He cares about you." That's a promise that we have in Scripture, that God cares about us. This 100% is not the only verse that says this. There are plenty of verses. A quick Google search will reveal to you talking about how much God loves and cherishes you. And if you don't feel like He does, if you feel like He's ignoring your needs and He hasn't seen you in your season, again, I'm going to tell you, you need to pray about that. You need to honestly tell Him, God, I know that your word tells me that you love me, but I don't feel it right now. Would you show it to me? Would you help me to see? Because I'm really needing your help. I am feeling so low, and I am feeling so lonely. And you worry, if you are worried that you're not going to be in a relationship, because I have felt that way in the past, that's a worry that you can bring before God, and something that He's going to be so delighted to comfort you in. And I do want to say, there have been so many times in my life that I've prayed about something and I haven't immediately seen results for those prayers. A lot of time, it takes time. You're well used to this. If you've been single for a while, you already know that things take time because you're in your single season right now. But so I will say that it's not anything wrong with you or wrong with your prayers if you're not immediately seeing results. Honestly, God doesn't usually work in that way for me. There's been a few times, but most of the time he hears you and he gives you an opportunity to trust him by not immediately answering those prayers, but answering them in his timing. But you gotta pray about it. You gotta tell God that this is a worry of yours, that there is a pain in being single. Because another assurance that we have from Scripture comes from Psalm 34:18. This is one of my favorite verses, but Psalm 34:18 says, "The Lord is close to the brokenhearted. He rescues those whose spirits are crushed." God is close to people who are in pain. God has felt so much immense pain himself. So again, if you don't feel that closeness, I ask that you ask God to reveal it to you. But this is a promise, and this is an assurance that we have, is that God is near to us when we are struggling, when our hearts are broken. And something that I have learned recently is my loneliness is honestly a reason for me to continue to draw near to God. My loneliness, if I allow it, can push me nearer to God, because who else can I go to when I'm experiencing it? It's a weakness in which God is made strong. Because I'm lonely, I have to go back to God over and over and over again to be comforted. And each time I do, I get closer and closer and closer to him. So I ask, if your loneliness is a burden for you, that you allow that burden to cultivate deeper intimacy between you and the Lord. And again, it goes back to that first point. It's not always fun. It's not always enjoyable, but that's a fruit that you can reap in your season of singleness if you choose to allow it. The third thing that I wish someone had told me sooner about being single, and just another fact, is that when you're single for a really long time, it can make you wonder what's wrong with you. I definitely felt this way when I was in high school. No one was really paying attention to me. The people who were, I had no interest in whatsoever. And I had almost all of my friends were people who were in relationships, and when they were out of one, they were in another very quickly. And then I was sitting there not getting any pursuit from anybody. And I really did feel like there was something inherently wrong with me. I wanted to know, why weren't men interested in me, or boys, I guess we should say, because it was high school. But this did continue into college. I went to a college where there were way more women than there were men. So most of the men were in relationships. A lot of people got married very young. And when you were single, it was such a distinct feeling. You did feel like there was something wrong with you, because everywhere you turned, there was another beautiful relationship unfolding before your eyes. And I just want to say that there is nothing wrong with you. And something that I had to learn when I was in college is that it is actually insulting to God to walk around believing that there's something wrong with you, because God made you fearfully and wonderfully. So when you then say, no, there's something wrong with me, I'm unattractive, no one wants to be with me, I'm flawed, you're disgracing God's handiwork. God is saying, what are you talking about? I'm so proud of you. I'm so in love with you. How could you say that about, like, I know the truth and you are mine. You belong to me. And it was hard. I didn't love myself in those seasons. So it was very hard for me to accept that God could love me. But I want to assure you that he does. And if it helps to hear it from me, I know what it's like to think that there's something wrong with you. But being single does not mean there is anything wrong with you. In fact, there isn't anything wrong with you. Let me just go ahead and be that voice if you need to hear it today. I encourage you to revisit some of the verses that I shared earlier about Psalm 139, specifically verse 14, which, just to reiterate, it says, "Thank you for making me so wonderfully complex. Your workmanship is marvelous. How well I know it." We can also look at verses 17 and 18. Which are the ones that are saying, "How precious are your thoughts about me, O God. They cannot be numbered. I can't even count them. They outnumber the grains of sand. And when I wake up, you are still with me." God honestly knows and loves and cherishes us so much. So I just want to speak against the lie that because I'm single, it means I'm unwanted. It means that I'm not going to be in a relationship, and it means that there is something inherently unwantable and unattractive about me. So that's the third thing. And the fourth and final thing that I wish someone would have told me sooner, or that I could have just heard when I was going through my single season sooner, is just the kind of the warning that being single and being alone can make you very restless and very anxious. When you are longing for something, it is so easy to then not appreciate the current season that you are in. And singleness is just one of the best examples of this. I long for a relationship. I want to experience romance and be with somebody. And I have to be so careful. I have to submit this every day in prayer, that my desires for the future don't detract from my experience in the present. I will just not even enjoy and appreciate the season that God currently has me in if I'm always looking ahead. And I really think singleness is one of the best examples of this. There's so many others, like when you are not satisfied with your job and you're longing for another, or maybe you're not single anymore but you're longing for children and you don't have them yet. Those desires are again things that can bring us closer to God, but if we hyper focus on them, we're going to miss what He's working on in our current season. I am not at all someone who has this down. I have to work on this all the time. I don't have a mastery of this at all because I'm a daydreaming type of personality, and it's just so easy to just think about the day that I do get to experience romance. And that is not all bad, but it needs to be kept in check. I also want to read from Lamentations 3 because this passage also speaks a little bit about this issue. I'm going to start with Lamentations 3 verses 24 through 27, and I do want to emphasize verse 27 here. But it starts with, I say to myself, the Lord is my inheritance, therefore I will hope in Him. The Lord is good to those who depend on Him, to those who search for Him. So it is good to wait quietly for salvation from the Lord, and it is good for people to submit at an early age to the yoke of His discipline. Another translation of this same scripture says it is good to bear the yoke while you are young. And this passage encouraged me so much when I was having a hard semester in college, because it is good for us to experience this restlessness and this wrestling within us between our desires and the appreciation for our present circumstances. And it is okay to have the hope that God is going to meet those desires. He's going to fulfill those needs that you genuinely have. But it is good to wait quietly for the salvation of the Lord. And I'm so happy that this Bible does not say it is easy to wait quietly for the salvation of the Lord, because it is 100% not easy, but it's good. And our restlessness can lead us to this waiting when we submit that restlessness to God. Ecclesiastes 3 says, for everything there is a season, a time for every activity under heaven. There is a time to be born and a time to die, a time to plant and a time to harvest, a time to kill and a time to heal, a time to tear down and a time to build up, a time to cry and a time to laugh, a time to grieve and a time to dance, a time to scatter stones and a time to gather stones, a time to embrace and a time to turn away, a time to search and a time to quit searching, a time to keep and a time to throw away, a time to tear and a time to mend, a time to be quiet and a time to speak, a time to love and a time to hate, a time for war and a time for peace. I really feel like this passage is just really emphasizing that there are things that are going to happen, but there is a time and place in which these things happen. There is a time for romance and the beauty that just follows it where it goes. But there is a time for longing and a time to be alone with the Lord. And a similar verse that is not a fun verse, but it seconds this thought process is Psalms 119:71, which says, "My suffering was good for me, for it taught me to pay attention to your decrees." Again, so relieved that when King David wrote this, he did not say, "My suffering was easy," or "I wanted to suffer," because he didn't. But you can acknowledge that it was good for you. And I truly believe that when we're out of our single seasons, we'll be able to look back on them and we'll be able to appreciate the lessons that we learned during those seasons. Even if they weren't easy, even if they were super hard, it will be good for us, because if we allow it to, it will draw us nearer to God and we'll be able to experience intimacy with Him. I think it is just important to acknowledge that restlessness that just naturally follows loneliness. You're just so ready a lot of the times for that relationship, but you don't ever want to miss the beauty of what God might be doing in your current season. There are honestly so many gifts I can say from my single season, and I have to write them down and I have to pray about them every day because I am so quick to forget them. So this is again something, I don't have this down. I have to work on this all the time. But I think it's important to be aware that when you're lonely and when you're single, you are going to be anxious and restless and ready for the future. And you can't be so futuristic that you miss what's going on around you and then you have regrets that you didn't use your single season well. And that's a great transition into the 4 tips that I would give. If you have been single a really long time, you're ready for a relationship, you desire a relationship, and you are just having a hard time with some of this loneliness that comes with being single, these are the 4 things that help me when I'm having a really hard day with this and I'm really struggling. All right, my first tip that helps me when I'm having a hard time with my singleness and when I am just thinking about why is it taking 24 years? Why have I not been in a relationship yet? I'm so ready, God. What is going on? The first thing, I've already talked about this, but it is to pray those honest and not fluffy prayers. I think sometimes we look at prayer as something that has to be very proper and something that has to just sound a certain way and we have to be happy when we do it. And guys, that is not true. As I said, we already know from Psalm 139 that God knows our thoughts. He already knows that we're not happy. He already knows that we're struggling. So the quickest and just easiest thing to do is to just already be honest with Him about those things, because what's the point? You can't lie to God. You can't hide how you're really feeling. So my first tip is when you're having a hard time, you've got to pray about it and you've got to tell God you're having a hard time. And it's okay to be even vulnerable and saying, God, I'm disappointed that I'm not in a relationship. I want to trust you, but I'm having a hard time right now because I really thought this would have happened for me sooner. And I don't understand why this isn't the case, and this is painful for me, God. When you are honest with Him and you allow Him to see that side of you, He already sees it, but I guess what I mean is when you open the door to Him, then He is able to come in and heal that wound. But He can't address it. He can't work on it with you if you're pretending like it's not even there. So first tip, pray honest prayers. Second tip, use your time well. So you have free time when you're single because you don't have a significant other to distract you and to pour into and invest in. But I have found so many things that are not good uses of that free time that honestly hurt me. This is something that is personal to me. This is not the case for everybody, but I find that I have such a worse day when I am on social media for a really long time. In fact, I frequently will just take breaks from social media for months because while I really like it, and I would never say that social media is evil, when you're single and all you see are friends who are in relationships, or for me, when you see the guy that you were going on dates with in a relationship with someone else, that just brings up so much pain and unpleasantness that you do not need to be simmering in and just wallowing in. And so that is not a good use of my time. There's so many other things that I like to do for fun. Like I enjoy writing or reading a good book or sketching in my sketchbook or whatever it is for you. Use those opportunities with your free time to do something like that instead of spending a really long time on social media or whatever it might be that is hurtful for you. You're going to know what will wound you in these seasons. So just be proactive about avoiding those things. Tip number 3 is to spend time with community. This is where it's hard. If you don't have good community, I think you need to pray about it. But I also understand this might be one of those areas where when you're praying about it, it doesn't happen immediately. And there is a pain there. I know in my own life, I used to pray for a mentor, and I have one now, but I met her about a year after I started praying for one. And that was hard. And this is again where it just kind of comes back to God's timing. And it's not that He doesn't hear those prayers, but they're not always going to be answered right away. So I understand the pain of if you don't have community and you're praying for it and you don't see it yet. Keep on asking, because it is God's desire for us to have fellowship with other believers. We see this in the operation of the early church. And this is something that will help you. I feel so rejuvenated and just that my cup has been filled when I've had a really good conversation with another woman, even if she's not single herself. But it honestly, it distracts you from that pain and it replaces that void and that need that you have for a relationship. Even though it's not the same kind of relationship, it still is a filling of our need for intimacy with other people. So tip number 3, find good community and have fellowship with other people. And my last tip number 4, is use this season to better yourself and invest in your gifts. Personally, I really feel a calling on my life to write. I've always loved writing, and when you're single, like we said, you have that free time. So I use my season, not all the time. I don't always use it well. Sometimes I'm on social media and I'm on there for hours and I ruin my day. But sometimes I do use the time well and I go off to a little coffee shop and I write. And whatever that is for you, if you don't know what your gifts are, then pray about it. This is going to be a recurring theme for this video. Have those honest conversations with God about, God, I want to know what I should be doing right now, but I need you to guide me. I have no idea. Would you please speak to me through the people around me? Would you help me to discern what is good advice and what is bad advice? Would you help me to have clarity in hearing your own voice in my life? Just pray and ask that He reveal what the calling He's placed on your life is. And in the meantime, when you don't have the relationship that you're yearning for, invest in those gifts that God has equipped you with, because God has equipped all of us with gifts. Maybe it's even just the gift of being a good friend, and this is your time to pour into special friendships in your life. Whatever it is, ask Him to reveal it to you and use this time for that. That's my 4th tip. In closing, I just want to say that singleness is a season. There are people who are single their entire lives. I truly believe that if that is you, that is something you're aware of. I think God has to be clear with those people that that is the calling He has given them, because I think most of us, there's a natural need for a partner. And I think it's so reassuring to look in the book of Genesis and see that Adam was walking with God and he was still lonely. God still made him Eve. Adam should have been completely fulfilled because he was alone with the Lord, having just the closest intimacy that we can experience here on earth with Him. And even still, he was lonely and God made him a woman. So I think that's a very natural desire. And to just know that it is a season, it's going to have an end. So again, try to enjoy it. Take advantage of this time to do things that you enjoy and that make you happy. I think this is a great time to have that intimacy and that honesty with God. And I also just encourage you to to have hope. A recent thought that has occurred to me is we think of 1 Corinthians 13 as the love chapter, but it emphasizes, the three qualities: faith, hope, and love. And it does say that the greatest of these is love. But I think it's so cool that hope is even up there. Faith and love, these are these huge attributes that are so significant. And I think sometimes we forget the significance of having hope, that God is going to bring us a relationship, that God does see us and He knows us and He knows our pain. He's right there in the midst of it with us. So in closing, I just hope that this video has been encouraging to you. And I figured maybe this is a good way, maybe this is a good use of my season. I am single. I have never been in a relationship, but that gives me a platform to speak to people who are in that same season themselves. I know it's going to mean more coming from me than it would to someone who's been in relationships before. I know the pain, I know the ache, but I also know that I am loved by God, I am seen by Him, that He has a man out there for me, and He's coming, but it's going to be on God's timing and not my own. And in the meantime, I get to speak to other people about what I'm learning and the season that I'm in. So I hope you feel a little more encouraged after watching this video, because that was my desire in kind of just recording some of these thoughts. And I'll see you guys again soon.